In studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, we have reached the end of chapter 12 and are beginning the 13th chapter, the parable of the gods. And this corresponds to the third part of the Kena. The Kena itself consists of 4 parts or 4 chapters. The first one begins by asking the question, the 4 questions, which seek to know what is it that makes our mind, what is it that makes our life breath move forward, what is it that is the impeller of our word, and what is it that sets the eye and ear to their workings, the senses. With these 4 questions, it begins an introspective process, awakening us to recognize that there is a greater reality. We have in our life experience the experience of 2 levels of reality, matter and the material world, and mind and our thought world. Matter, as in the case our body or any material substance, does not know our thoughts. Our thoughts can know matter. In the same way, there is a greater reality beyond our mind that our mind cannot know, but it knows our mind. In fact, the Kena describes it as mind of our mind, speech of our speech, life of our life, and sense of our sense. Now, these four questions and these four faculties or powers of our consciousness will take on a very important place as we proceed further, because it is through these four that we are going to discover and come to know and live in that greater divine reality. So, in the first part of the Kena, it began by asking these four questions, and then it answered the four questions by describing that in these terms as mind of our mind and so on. In the second part, which we have completed, it teaches us how, with our awareness, we are to enter in relation with that reality which cannot be known. And although it cannot be known, it is possible for us to approach it in the highest part of our mind's awareness until something of that begins to reflect in our mind and we begin to know it. And this is what we have to cultivate here in life, in these circumstances, but awakening through that perception to a new, a more complete, a higher, diviner consciousness. And so this was end of part 2. The third part now begins the narration of a story. And if we did not have Sri Aurobindo's very detailed and insightful guidance, revealing all the fine nuances of the story, we would not have perhaps been able to guess, because the modern mind is differently formed. And as you read the story, you will sense there is something deeper to it, but it's not immediately obvious. But then when we read Sri Aurobindo's commentary, you will discover how every tiniest detail of the story not only represents a deep truth, but in fact is a step in our own inner spiritual journey as we grow to the awareness of the divine consciousness. The fourth part of the Kena then completes this discussion with a revelation of that consciousness and how it dawns in us and transforms us, and the stages of the transformation itself. So we are beginning now the third part of the Kena and Sri Aurobindo's commentary on it. Before we read the commentary itself, we may quickly scan through the story, and it is spread out over 12 verses, somewhat repetitive in the way it is stated, and the meaning of that repetition we will appreciate as we go along. So, in the first verse, the story begins, and I'm reading in Sri Aurobindo's translation, but summarizing also in places. The eternal conquered for the gods, and in the victory of the eternal, the gods grew in greatness. This was what they saw. Ours the victory, ours the greatness. Verse 2. The eternal knew their thought and appeared before them, and they knew not what was this mighty daemon. Third verse. They said to Agni, O thou who knowest all things born, learn of this thing. What may be this mighty daemon? And he said, so be it. Now when you look at these details, you might wonder, what is it? Why does Agni have to say, so be it? Why do they have to say to him, what is this thing? Learn of it. And each of those details we will see later actually captures a step in our own internal process of the sadhana. Verse 4. He rushed towards the eternal, and it said to him, "Who art thou?" "I am Agni," he said. "I am he that knows all things born." Verse 5. "Since such thou art, what is the force in thee?" And Agni answers, "Even all this I could burn, all that is upon the earth." 6. The eternal set before him a blade of grass. "This burn." And he made towards it with all his speed, but he could not burn it. There he ceased and turned back. "I could not know of it. What might be this mighty daemon?" Agni says. Verse 7. Then they, the gods, said to Vayu, "O Vayu, this discern, what is this mighty daemon?" He said, "So be it." Verse 8. He rushed upon that. It said to him, "Who art thou?" "I am Vayu," he said, "and I am he that expands in the mother of things." Now, each of these details, Vayu expanding, the mother of things, all of these we will appreciate for the profundity of the knowledge which it reveals, not only of the working of the cosmos outside us, but the working within us of these powers, these cosmic powers, and how through each of these powers we can approach the eternal, what role they play, and what steps we pass through in the journey. And it's all captured in this beautiful story, simply stated. And so he said, "I am Vayu." Verse 9. "Since such thou art, what is the force in thee? Even all this I can take for myself, all this upon the earth." For him a blade of grass. "Take this." He went towards it with all his speed, and he could not take it. Even there he ceased. Even thence he returned. "I could not discern of that. What is this mighty daemon?" Then they said to Indra, "Master of plenitudes, get thou the knowledge. What is this mighty daemon?" He said, "So be it." He rushed upon that. That vanished before him. I see, of the three gods who have approached, the last one, Indra alone, there is no conversation. That vanishes. Because of the nature of Indra's way of knowing. The mind, when it approaches to know that, it cannot see form. It is beyond form. And so it vanishes. And then finally, verse 12. He, now Indra, unlike the other two, does not come back. He continues in this space in which the eternal has vanished. He, in the same ether, came upon the woman. And the woman here in Sanskrit is Sri Uma Haimavati, the daughter of the snowy summits, Uma. So he, in the same ether, came upon the woman, even upon her who shines out in many forms, Uma, daughter of the snowy summits. To her he said, "What was this mighty daemon?" And this completes the third part. The last part of the Kena, completes the story with, she said to him, "It is the eternal. Of the eternal is this victory in which you shall grow to greatness." Then alone he came to know that this was the Brahman. And then the rest of the text of the part 4 speaks of how the gods came to know that, and how because of this contact with the eternal through these three gods. These three are the greatest of the gods. Remember, all the gods have sent these three to represent them and to find out. And then it says how, as the gods seek to know and they approach, how that reveals itself and how that works through the gods. And the gods realize their power is only its power. And when they submit to it, it fills them and works through them and transforms their working. Now, immediately we realize these gods are not just a mere allegory of something happening outside. They are cosmic powers, but also within us, individual psychological selves. They are the means by which we can know. Now, think of it this way, and we continue this from the discussion in the previous chapter. The gods not only are working in the cosmos to take things forward in evolution, they work in us. All the awakening of our psychological powers is the awakening of their energies and their action. And within us, all the gods are functioning. But at some point, when they approach, or rather when we come to meet that, the gods are somehow unable to. And they must put forward these three representatives. Agni, representing the material domain, Vayu, representing the vital, and Indra, representing the mind. So the three sheaths of our being, each has its representative in these three deities. And this connects perfectly with the first four questions which were asked by the Kena in the beginning. And each of those four now relates to one of these deities. The mind, who is it that makes the mind go forward? Indra is the lord of the mind, as well as of the senses, which is the mind working in the physical consciousness. But remember, the power within Indra is that. Mind of our mind is that. And so Indra awakening in us has developed our mind. And if Indra within us realizes that his power is of that, then through Indra we grow to know the mind of our mind, the divine supramental consciousness. Similarly, the life breath here is Vayu. And Vayu in us is increasing our life breath, but his power is life of our life. And the word that men speak is what gives form. And this formative power is Agni. It is that which has worked in us to give form. And the working of the power in Agni is that. And so speech of our speech. And you see now suddenly what began with a very simple, ordinary seeming questioning, with which we could enter in a sensory experience by introspecting what makes us think, what leads our mind, opens out now to a cosmic working of powers of the gods. And through we are relating to that. And it's as if by the intensification of the working of these cosmic powers in us, we are assisted in our evolution and awakened or led to the divine realization. And these three deities now, in the cluster of the working of the gods in us, these three are put forward as the means by which we can know or approach the divine, the Brahman, the eternal. When Agni approaches first, he cannot beyond a point. And yet he can make an approach. But beyond a point, he cannot go and must return. Although he knows all things born, when he meets something which is not born, he cannot know. Although he has all the knowledge, he cannot have the knowledge of this. And so something within us will take us as far as it can, and at some point cease and come back. And then Vayu, which can embrace all things, that cannot embrace this. It cannot blow it away. And so he also comes back, and there's a falling back. But in our consciousness, the mind, Indra, being its leader, that can go there, but when the mind approaches the eternal, it cannot see. The form vanishes. But there is an ether. And in that ether, someone is there who can reveal to him and lead him forward. And so our mind of all these deities, Indra, is the most is the one who can approach most close. And even then, he needs the help of this Divine Mother, who shows him and leads him to, gives him the understanding of the deeper working. And then the gods know that it was not their victory, it was the eternal who worked through them, and they submit to him. Now, all of this, in fact, describes stages of our human evolution. In the particular practice of the Vedic yoga, one consciously entered in relation with these divine powers, the gods. And in this way, in our awakening of our mind's awareness, it was the gods who grew in us. It was they who assisted in the growth of our mind. In the modern context, we are not so comfortable with that idea, but nevertheless, its truth continues. Rather, we see it more as impersonal, cosmic powers or qualities or faculties of our consciousness. And so our mind grows, approaches, and at some point when it cannot proceed, a very rarefied state of the mind remains, in which it can begin to glimpse. And so there's the whole process of the consciousness rising through the mind and thus knowing, and then accepting the action of that higher knowledge and power in the mind, and through all the other faculties. And the rest of the part 4 will describe the transforming process as this continues. But part 3, we begin to see how it makes not only eminent sense, not only how it relates to all that we have read so far. From the first verse down, it is one continuous text. But now, dwelling upon each of these verses, we realize that each represents a step in our journey of knowledge and awakening to the divine. And the reason why the repetition is there becomes now obvious. Remember, in the Veda as in the Upanishads, the focus is not on rational, intellectual, or philosophical understanding alone. That comes incidentally. The focus is on the experience. And each verse is meant to be dwelt upon, meditated upon. That's why it is called Upanishad. In the modern explanation of the term, Upanishad is translated as staying close or staying in the present. In crude terms, it is described as dwelling in the heart of the forest. But it's none of these. Sri Aurobindo translates the same phrase because later on the text itself declares this is the Upanishad. Sri Aurobindo translates Upanishad as it is here. Upanishad means inner knowledge, that which enters into the final truth and settles in it. And so the verses of the Upanishad are meant to take us step by step into the inner knowledge. And the normal process of studying them is to dwell on their deeper meaning. And by dwelling on their deeper meaning, it's as if you open out to the experience of that deeper meaning. And so each time that there's a repetition in the text, again and again this happens, that the gods say, You please go and find out. And then Agni says, so be it. Vayu says, so be it. And similarly with Indra, it represents a certain step in the consciousness turning to know. And so each repetition is a dwelling in a different part of our consciousness. And this is the power of such a narration of the parable. You will see in many of in almost every parable in the world's history, in all the stories of the world where a parable is presented to help us to some deeper understanding, you will find this rhythm of three. This happens, then again this happens in a slightly different way, and again it happens in a slightly different way. And each time it's taking us one step deeper and one step deeper. In all the fairy tales from the European tradition, you'll find the same thing repeating 3 times. In all the stories from the Mahabharata or the Puranic tradition also, you'll find this rhythm of 3. And because each time we take a step deeper, we go further. I'm tempted to narrate what I may describe as an incident, but which can be presented also as a parable if you articulate it like this. So it goes something like this, and it's at the same time a real incident as well as a symbol of something. After many years, I met her, and she came and started describing and discussing things of life. And then I asked, "How are you?" And she stopped her narration and then said, "Well, I'm busy with these things, I'm doing this, I'm doing that." I heard her and again asked, "How are you?" And she stopped her narration. And then she said, "Well, with age, I have a few aches and pains, some problems here and there, some disturbances." And again I asked, "How are you?" And she stopped and became quiet and said, "I'm content. I'm happy." We could take it one more step and say, again I asked, "How are you?" And then there was silence. And then we remained in communion in silence. So see, in the narration of the parable, the story proceeds. The listener is led step by step from a consciousness which was completely dispersed, looking out at the world and busy with the happenings. It steps back. How are you? And what is I? And first it is my activities in life. And when again the question comes, how are you? There's the recognition, oh, this is not yet me. And it comes to me, and of course it settles on the body and the emotions and the disturbances. And again the question breaks that, forces you a step deeper. And then you feel you. But in the narration itself, the narrator, in his consciousness, dwells on what is meant by you. The question is exactly the same. It was asked 3 times or 4 times. It's not the formulation of the question. It's the content of the energy, the intention or the consciousness, the focus of the awareness which is put. And so when somebody asks, how are you? Immediately your own consciousness is to what it is that he has placed his intention in. And it forces you to introspect, and each time deeper and deeper. As a result, simply listening to the narration forces you to shift your center, brings you into a deeper awareness of yourself. And the question, how are you, leads you eventually, finally, to that deepest part where you are content. You simply are. And there's nothing else, nothing to worry about. If the whole thing had to be presented as a news report, it would go something like, 3 times he asked, "How are you?" And finally they stopped talking and they meditated. It means nothing and it does not convey the experience in its stages. The philosophical statement would be like this. It will stay, these are the three deities, these represent this, they approach, but they fail, and the truth is beyond them. That's a philosophical statement. It has no value for us in terms of our experience in the yoga. But when you take it in this story, the gods say, ours the victory, ours the greatness, and the eternal appears before them. And the gods don't recognize, they don't know what is this. This questioning, this sudden surprise that something appears that they do not know. How can it be? And so they put forward their representative. They said to Agni, you know all things which are born. You find out what is this. And he said, so be it. He rushed towards the eternal and it said to him, who are you? Now immediately you see in our consciousness, when through our power of formation we approach and someone asks, who are you? You stop. I am Agni. I am he that knows all things born. And this knowledge comes forward. And then it says, since such thou art, what is the force in thee? Now this is the interesting question. What makes Agni Agni? What gives him the power to be and to do what he does or what he has? And he says, even all this I could burn, all that is upon the earth. So he recognizes a capacity, but not yet its source. And so when the Eternal places before him a blade of grass, and again we will see the deeper sense of that, this burn, the Eternal says, and Agni, he made towards it with all his speed, but he could not burn it. And again the sense of with all the speed, the full force of his power. We will explore later the full sense of it. There he ceased and turned back. I could not know of it what might be this mighty daemon. Now you see here, when you dwell upon it in this way, you can recognize that there's a whole movement of something reaching out. All the knowledge which is there in that consciousness fails and must give way to some other perception, which gives way to some still higher perception. But none of these are useless in themselves. They prepared the ground for this next perception, which prepares the ground for the next perception. So in the sequence, there is an unfolding of our powers of consciousness, each preparing the ground for the next one building on the previous and completing it in a certain sense, until the last goes as far as it can to that fine ether, where all form fades out. And it meets there something which is form, and that is Uma Haimavati, the woman, the Divine Mother. And to that woman, he asks. And so that last step of the completion of knowledge, there's mediatrix. She knows the Lord, and she can be known by the mind. And so that link is completed, and she reveals the nature of the Lord and how he works in all these workings. In this process, we are step by step being led to this poise. And so the 12 verses, although seeming to repeat in terms of verbal content, each time they repeat, the nature of the question, the nature of the experience is one step deeper, one step higher, building on the previous. And since this is the approach of the study of the Upanishad, that you take the verse and dwell upon, get the deeper sense of it, and then go to the next, and then the next. It's leading you step by step in your experience, in your journey of the yoga. Until finally, she said to him, it is the eternal. of the eternal is this victory in which you grow to greatness. Then alone he came to know that this was the Brahman. So when she says that of the eternal is the victory, all the gods, all these cosmic powers which are working in us to push forward our evolution and growth, so far they thought it was their victory. And this is our state in our evolution. I have become intelligent. I have become strong. I am capable. I can know. And then we realize, oh, but it is his power, his knowledge, which is my knowledge. It is his power and energy, which is my energy. It is his growth in me that is the victory. And at that point, you stop and give way to his action. So you can feel now, when we look at it this way, it is something so profound and so practical. And that's why it is a parable, a story, a narration, but with a deep meaning, not just to be understood, but in which you are led into an experience. So Sri Aurobindo begins this chapter 13, the parable of the gods, continuing where we left off. From its assertion of the relative knowledge of the unknowable Brahman and the justification of the soul's aspiration towards that which is beyond its present capacity and status, the Upanishad turns to the question of the means by which that high-reaching aspiration can put itself in relation with the object of its search. How is the veil to be penetrated and the subject consciousness of man to enter into the master consciousness of the Lord? What bridge is there over this gulf? Knowledge has already been pointed out as the supreme means open to us. A knowledge which begins by a sort of reflection of the true existence in the awakened mental understanding. But mind is one of the gods. The light behind it is indeed the greatest of the gods, Indra. Then, an awakening of all the gods through their greatest to the essence of that which they are, the one Godhead which they represent. So all the gods awaken by bringing forward their essence, which is, by bringing forward their greatest. And that greatest turns to the essence. And that's how the link is made. By the mentality opening itself to the mind of our mind, the sense and speech also will open themselves to the sense of our sense and to the word behind our speech, and the life to the life of our life. The Upanishad proceeds to develop this consequence of its central suggestion by a striking parable or apologue. This is the full first paragraph. And it now links all that we have discussed with what is to follow. All the gods, that is, all the workings of the psychological powers in us, even as they are cosmic powers in the universe, they all come together, put forward their greatest. In the universal evolution, you can see it is the awakening of the self-aware mind. In our individual evolution, it is this mental awareness by which we are able to know. If the animal were to experience the same contact without the power of mental knowledge, it would feel something in the emotions. It would feel a great joy perhaps, but it would not know what is the source of this joy or even the fullness of the possibility of this joy or delight. Because we have an awakened mind, we experience the joy that fills, and then we turn to the source of it. And we can know that there is this source in this rarefied part of the mind where we can begin to touch that or reflect that. And because this part knows through it all the rest of our powers, all the gods in us, they turn and they find the same connection and the fulfillment. And so this becomes the bridge which is going to link our normal human consciousness to the master consciousness of the Lord. When, as we have been told, our consciousness is unable to know because of its limitations, and yet there can be this awakening and the bridge that can be formed. The veil which was separating the two can now be rent by this effort. And so this becomes now the full focus. The mind, he says, is one of the gods. The light behind it is indeed the greatest of the gods, Indra. And so Indra is going to be the focus. It is Indra, and through Indra that this link is made in the parable. So in the commentary, Sri Aurobindo speaks of this as a striking parable. What is it that is striking in us? It goes straight to the point. It awakens in us by a sudden shock or revelation. Apologue is the word Sri Aurobindo uses. Parable or apologue. Apologue is a story, symbolic, which is meant to convey a message. And in this case, you can see the story itself you could narrate to a child. And the child will understand in his own way. Here was the divine who came, and all the gods they could not defeat. And they thought they were so great, and they realized it was not their greatness. He was greater. If you go to New Delhi, there is the Akshardham temple. In the evening, they had a sound and lights show. Not sound and lights. Water fountain with sound and lights. And it's very beautifully done. The water jets, which are computer controlled, which blow different patterns, moving around, and the lights which glow out through the water. It's extremely beautiful. And at the same time, there's the laser beam which draws out images on the wall and on the water fountains. And they take, at least for the last few years, it is this story from the Kena that they present there. And it is made accessible to children, with children playing in the water fountain. And then this thing appears before them. No, they show the gods first, and then the children play on the fountain, and then they challenge the gods, and so on. The point being, it's a story which is accessible to little children in the way their mind can take it, which is, we think we are so great, but the divine is greater. You grow a little older, and you see it's not just us, and you realize that the gods are our powers. And then you say, oh, all right, I thought my power of knowledge, my strength, my capacity were so great, but that is greater. And the deeper sense that it is actually that greatness which is working through my capacity. That makes sense. Oh yes, I realize my intelligence is really given to me. It helps to weaken the sense of the ego subjectively. And the same thing now has a profound meaning for the yogi, who in his consciousness experiences this truth, that as he approaches the divine, his powers of perception fail and fall back, and only one fine edge remains in the refined layers of the mind, which can begin by becoming very quiet. It can begin to reflect. And then through that reflection, gradually, that greater knowledge begins to enter and reveal itself. And then we realize in the silence of our senses and psychological powers, we realize that always it was that power which was working through them, through us. Our sense of separateness thins out. The consciousness which experienced separateness from the divine begins to fade out. And we have the sense of the divine working in us, through us, even as he works in and through all things in the universe. And exactly the same story is describing this transition, which the little child could access in his own limited way. And this was the power of the Puranic stories. They are transforming. Although accessible to little children, and very fascinating for them because something deep inside resonates with the deeper truth, even as the surface mind and emotions get a moral content of the story. But those stories narrated in childhood continue and remain in us. They are almost like, for lack of a better word, a computer virus which is inserted in the software, working behind the scenes, doing its thing quietly. And all these stories which we have heard in our childhood, they pop up every now and then. Sri Aurobindo even comments that if you have not read the Mahabharata, you cannot truly know and appreciate the framework of Indian culture. Why? Because in those narrations, in those heroic figures which come forward, you will find the archetypes. Your central personality resonates with one of them, but all of them have their resonances to parts and impulses within you. And it is as if you are the medium, the space in which the Mahabharata is taking place. And as the Mahabharata proceeds, as these events unfold, you realize this is your battle of life. Objectively, your struggle in life, but subjectively, your struggle within yourself, in your growth, in your overcoming certain tendencies by higher tendencies. In that whole journey, Sri Krishna is the divine presence within. Always present, always seen, but beginning to think. By his very presence, he triggers events and makes things happen. And he leads inevitably to that big collision, which is the great battle. And the struggles in that battle, of which the essence, the cream, is held in the Bhagavad Gita. Very practically formulated for us in the battle of life, but also in our internal struggle. And now suddenly this whole story of the Mahabharata becomes for you a literal description of your own journey of life. Although we heard those stories as children, as we grow older, those things pop up, whether consciously or subliminally, and they work behind the scenes, shaping us and lead us forward. It's the reason why you will find the stories were always of this kind, given to the little children. We do not waste time with mere ordinary detective stories and other exciting narrations which do not have this deeper spiritual or eternal value. Yes, those you can do when you have grown up, when you have time to waste. But right now in the core formative years of your life, you give the deepest messages, which then continue through your life. And this is one of those narrations. But already it is, for our current study, we are ready to open into its deeper meaning. So Sri Aurobindo says, the Upanishad proceeds to develop this consequence of its central suggestion by a striking parable or apologue. The gods, the powers that affirm the good, the light, the joy and beauty, the strength and mastery, have found themselves victorious in their eternal battle with the powers that deny. Now, all these words he has used, he has put capitalized: good, light, joy, beauty, strength, and mastery. Capital because it's not just a moral good, it's not a physical light or a mental illumination, it's not a joy of the excitement of your emotions, but these are things of a deeper grade. The affirming of goodness is when within our consciousness we struggle. Shall I do this? Shall I do that? And the goodness coming forward is when you choose that which is for the good, not in moral terms, but for the good of the forward evolution, for the good of all, that which is a deeper, underlying, common, even universal, self existent good. So the light, joy, beauty, strength, and mastery, they represent things which are self existent, deeper truths which have to come forward. And that's the eternal battle of the gods with the powers that deny. And they've found themselves victorious. When? It is not said. So it is as if an incident that happens in eternity, but throughout eternity, in every human being, in every human situation, in the universe itself, in evolution. Again and again, this happens, that the gods are victorious in their battle. And that means what? That means having made a victory, was there a loss? No, it means the victory itself is a series of steps. Yes, occasionally you have forward movement and apparent defeats. But it's not so. There is a forward movement of the victory, which is one step. And then something comes, which shows the limitation of this victory. And so another victory. And another denial, showing limitation of this victory. And so another victory. And so this is part of a continuous process in victory in their eternal battle with the powers that deny. Now, in his wording, it's very suggestive. The so-called anti-divine or asuric powers, their role is simply to deny that which is not perfect. You will recall in an earlier chapter in the same commentary, Sri Aurobindo went in great detail on this when he describes the battle of the gods with the asuras. And there he points out that the human experience in this lower world, which is a reflection of the divine, is itself formed by a double action. There is a positive action and a negative action. The mortal life, he says, is a dual representation of that with two conflicting elements in it, negative and positive. Its negative elements of death, suffering, incapacity, strife, division, etc., I'm skipping, are a dark figure which conceal and serve the development of that which its positive elements cannot yet achieve. Immortality hiding itself from life in the figure of death. Delight hiding itself from pleasure in the figure of suffering, and so on. And the positive elements suggest what the Brahman is, but never are what the Brahman is. Although their victory, the victory of the gods, is always the victory of the Brahman over its own self-negation. Always the self-denials of the dark and limiting figure of things. So the idea is this: Brahman himself cannot be known by consciousness which is fragmented. And yet every step forward, which is the victory of the gods, is a positive affirmation pointing to that, but it can never be that. And if you stopped with that forward step and the positive achievement and said, this is it, you would need something to say this is not it. And that is the other part, the other aspect, the negative, which is nothing but the truth of the Brahman saying, this is not it, not it. not it. And by that, forcing you to recognize your insufficiencies so that you can move forward one more step. But not only they say not it, in the denial, they conceal that which is hidden. By saying not it, they say there is something more that you have to find. You see, so the dark figure conceals and serves the development of the positive side. And the positive elements, they suggest, but they're never quite it. So in the Vedic vision, this double side of dark and light are not in the moral sense, as in modern terms, the religious formulation says that is good, that is bad, that is divine, that is anti-divine. It's not like that at all. The dark equally serves as much as the light. And so in the Veda, the concept is the human soul is like the baby which is being suckled, nourished for its growth by two mothers, the bright mother and the dark mother, the day and the night. Both have to suckle if the child has to grow. The sense of the duality, which is our experience here, is not seen as something negative or bad to be abandoned. Rather, it is the way in which the child can know and grow, through which the child can grow, until it can grow sufficiently that it knows the indivisible consciousness. But as long as it lives in a finite and limited awareness, cut off from the whole, the duality exists, and both sides are needed for the growth, for the suckling. So just rereading from that earlier chapter, still it is not this vastness merely, but the absolute infinity which is Brahman itself. And therefore within this dual figure of things, we cannot attain to ourself our highest. We have to transcend in order to attain. And so our pursuit of the positive elements of this existence, our worship of the gods of the mind, life, sense, is only a preparatory to the real travail of the soul. And we must leave this lower Brahman and know that higher. So you can see how the role of the gods is in this, helping in this forward journey. But they serve this purpose up to a point. At some point, you have to cross beyond the duality of the gods and the opposing forces to know that. And they can help you only go so far. And the parable, which we are now studying, really describes this. They have won. They have taken you as far as they could, at least for the moment. And rather than saying, this is it, we have done, the divine helps by saying, well, here is something missing. Here is something which you lack. And you can see this as the operation of the dark side. The dark side that says, this is not enough. There's more to be done. You could see it as opposing. And that's why the word daemon is what Sri Aurobindo uses to translate. The word in Sanskrit is yaksha. Again, suggestive of an inferior power, some spirit-like being. And the eternal appears before the gods as this spirit-like being, some inferior power. And for the gods, it is a shock. We who know everything, we who have conquered, suddenly now we face this who we do not know. That means there's something more left to conquer. Something which comes as if opposing us, challenging us. But when we look at the big picture, the opposition and challenge is not an asura fighting and opposing the gods. It is the eternal saying, there's something more to be realized. So in this picture, you realize that there's nothing in the universe which is truly in that negative sense in which the religious says to be rejected or dismissed. There is only the lower consciousness and its limitation which are to be rejected in order to rise higher. But the action of various forces which come and enter in collision, they are all ultimately helping us, because they all serve only through the duality of the light and dark experiences help us to grow. That's why equally the dark mother nourishes as the bright mother nourishes the soul. So the gods, powers that affirm the good, the light, the joy, the beauty, the strength, the mastery, have found themselves victorious. Now, in this list, you will find all the things which make our physical life complete and perfect. You will find all the things which we strive for in human aspiration and desire. Whatever you may desire, whatever the form of what you desire, I want more power, more knowledge, more wealth, more food, more comfort, whatever form it may take. What are you seeking inside the desire if you cut through? You're seeking the good, the light, the joy, the beauty, the strength, the mastery. I want more power. What are you seeking? The strength to be able to actualize, to be able to bring into expression whatever it is that you wish to. Mastery is really that, being able to overcome and express perfectly in spite of limitation. And in the same thing, in the same way, the joy, the beauty, the good, the light, always these are the things which are secretly our prime motivators. The lower consciousness, the lower form of desire is lower only because it does not seek directly these things. It seeks them indirectly. Even when somebody desires for what may appear to be perverse, it is only a desire to be free of convention and limitation, to find some greater freedom, which is a light. But it takes a perverse form because it feels as if it is going the other way by choice, when in fact it is only breaking out of certain limitation in order to come upon it from a greater freedom. So these are the things which the gods are affirming all the time, from the lowest to the highest. And they have found themselves victorious in their eternal battle with the powers that deny. And the powers that deny now we see now in a different way. It is Brahman that has stood behind the gods and conquered for them. The master of all who guides, the master of all who guides all, has thrown his deciding will into the balance, put down his darkened children and exalted the children of light. Now again, in this formulation, you see this is the Vedic view. The children of light, the children of darkness, both are his children. There's nothing in the universe which is not his, because they're all made of him. They're all part of his consciousness. This is the nature of the Brahman. All is himself. So everybody is his children. You see this so beautifully in the mother's working and her dealings with all things, including the Asuric beings and forces. With her, they are all her children. But there is a poise of the eternal which supports this play, and in the support, he chooses where he places the balance of his will. So the master of all, and that includes the children of light and children of darkness, he is master of both. Who guides all, he is guiding both, has thrown his deciding will into the balance. So he may withdraw his will and say, all right, children, play on. And at some point he says, okay, now I put my will and affirm this. And he puts his will to put down his darkened children and exalt the children of light. That condition we call the victory of the gods. He could just as well have put his will the other way, to put down the children of light and exalt the children of darkness. It is that period that we call the Kali Yuga, where everything is as if swamped in darkness. But it serves a great purpose. At that time, the activity of these children of darkness, they break the rigidified forms which prevent the forward evolution. And so he allows that play as long as necessary, and then he shifts his will and says, all right now, and he tilts the balance in favor of the children of light. And now the reversal begins. When does it begin? When he decides. You will remember in that little booklet, can you bring that? Yoga and its objects. Sri Aurobindo describes this condition of the play. And this is when you look at it this way, you call it the Leela. It is the play. And always it is he, the master of all, who guides all. And it is his play through these different forms. And then there are times when he chooses to experience the fall and the wallowing in ignorance and incapacity and the struggle. And he enjoys that. And then there are times when he wants to enjoy the full revelation of his light and force and capacity. And Sri Aurobindo describes this in this little booklet, the Yoga and its Objects. And he says, it is the soul itself is free and only plays at being bound. And when the enjoyment of ignorance and dualities and the joy of the play of dualities of joy and grief, pleasure and pain, then the yogis withdraw from the world and he continues to play this. And when he decides that it's time now to play with the light, he wills it. And Mr. Sri Aurobindo writes, there is nothing evil in this. It is God's play. The wise man is he who recognizes this truth and knowing his freedom, yet plays out God's play, waiting for his command to change the methods of the game. So when God says, all right, now I change. And then Sri Aurobindo writes something very powerful. Sri Aurobindo writes here, the command is now. And when he says it, you can feel. And he explains how through the various cycles of evolution, God keeps for himself one country in which this highest liberating knowledge is preserved. And when he chooses to take the pleasure of ignorance, then he withdraws the knowledge in this country. And he explains, for this Chatur Yoga, at least that country is India. And so he dims the knowledge in India and puts her down into weakness and degradation, so that she may retire into herself and not interfere with this movement of his Leela. And when he wants to rise up from the mud and once again become mighty and wise and blissful, then he once more pours out the knowledge on India and raises her up so that she may give the knowledge with its necessary consequences of might, wisdom and bliss to the whole world. So in the contracted movement, the yogis retire. In the expansive movements, they come forward. And so he explains how God's Leela in man moves always in a circle. But the point being, that command is now. And so we are at one of those great cyclic transitions. See, the play which is described here of the gods and the powers that deny is happening across time, across space, eternity and infinity of the universe, but also in gigantic movements of cycles. And within each cycle are sub-cycles, within each are smaller cycles, and within each, in our own lives, we have cycles and sub-cycles. So it makes for a very complex play of the divine will. And here on a massive scale, the divine command is now. And immediately the shift begins. And there is the affirming of the powers of the gods. There is this shift taking place. And he describes it as, the master of all who guides all has thrown his deciding will into the balance, put down his darkened children and exalted the children of light. It is this victory of the master of all. In this victory of the master of all the gods, this victory of the master of all, the gods are conscious of a mighty development of themselves, a splendid efflorescence of their greatness in man. their joy, their light, their glory, their power and pleasure. But they are not yet conscious that it is His will that has done this. So they think, we have become victorious. But notice, in this whole description, He has thrown in the word in man, meaning within us, this is happening. And the suggestion here is not only are we to see this text in the larger working of the play of the gods, but equally within us. When in us there is this efflorescence and growth of strength and knowledge and light, instead of saying, now we have grown, we have to realize His will, His light, His strength is growing in us. And that's the correction that we are being led to. But first, we seize that growth and say, now I'm awake, now I'm strong, now I'm conscious, now I'm intelligent, now I'm capable, now I have overcome. And this is the first action, instinct in us. And it's fine. We should not deny that. We accept this also as a first step to affirm and to fix what has been achieved. And Sri Aurobindo says, but their vision is as yet sealed to their own deeper truth. They know of themselves. They know not the eternal. They know the Godheads. They do not know God. And this is our condition. Our vision is sealed. It's not a crime. It's not something to blame. It is just a first step. And there's something more to be done. That vision has to be unsealed. Therefore, they see the victory as their own, the greatness as their own. And at that point, the divine comes forward and says, now I will help you to grow beyond this limitation. So we pause here. We have before us the larger vision of the sense of the play, of the powers of light, the powers of darkness, the gods and the demons and their struggle in the cosmos, within us. We have within us now the victory of the gods, and the gods having organized their victory, something is missing. Something more has to be done. And the divine consciousness puts forward its representation, which is a surprise and a challenge. And now we have to make the effort to know, to go beyond our sufficiency towards that which we do not yet know. And so the first verse of third part, the eternal conquered for the gods, and in the victory of the eternal, the gods grew to greatness. This was what they saw. Ours the victory, ours the greatness. In a single verse, this whole vision is captured just like that. So you can dwell on this verse, meditate on it, and draw out from it aspects. And you will find your whole perspective of life will change, and your sense of your own journey, of your life and sadhana and your personal growth, the whole perspective changes. Just this one verse with this big background. And the next verse we will take up next time. The eternal knew their thought and appeared before them, and they knew not what was this mighty daemon. Suddenly you realize with all we have, something remains which is far greater, unknowable. And so the effort to know begins. We'll continue this next Sunday.